Arda Ocal and Jacob Wolf for ESPN Esports. We just got done watching the Xbox Games Showcase. It lasted about an hour on a Thursday afternoon. 10 world premieres, 22 console launch exclusives. Many of them will be available either now or eventually through Xbox Game Pass or free to play. And also, there were some major announcements. And of course, with the anchor being Halo Infinite, we got to watch some extended gameplay. But let's get to some overall thoughts, Jacob. I found it interesting that the overall reaction to many from the Halo community in particular, because really, when you compare Xbox Series X to PS5 and the reveals, the thing we were talking about with PS5 was there wasn't a giant reveal, a hammer type game that was like the big hook. And Microsoft had that with Halo Infinite, and we knew that going in. The presentation started with Halo Infinite, and we saw some gameplay, which was cool, but we heard nothing about multiplayer. We heard nothing about leaderboards. How did in particular, the Halo part of it, what did you leave? What were your thoughts when we left that?
I haven't seen enough to really make a judgment call, but the biggest thing I was sort of taken aback by was the fact that we didn't have as much multiplayer talk as I think people would want to think about. Look, like the multiplayer esports portion of gaming is the minority portion of gaming in terms of like how many people play single player games, but specifically that franchise has so much history in multiplayer games that like that's why people remember it. I think people may not remember this, new younger gamers, right, who weren't around for this generation, but Halo was the game that I bought the original Xbox with, Halo Combat Evolved. And then when Xbox Live came out, which is like the revolutionary genre or like platform defining online multiplayer for consoles in particular, and not computer games, right? Like Xbox Live was Halo 2. That's what it was. Like that was the game you got Xbox Live for. It defined what online console gaming meant, right? Like I don't want to go into the whole PC thing because obviously online gaming's been a thing on PCs for a really long time, but Xbox Live and Halo 2 were revolutionary for the console space. And so I think a lot of people, and it continued, right? Halo 3 was that way too. Obviously, being on a different console, being on the 360, and the 360 was the biggest console at the time too, right when Halo 3 came out. So both of those games, like the hooks are multiplayer. People remember those for multiplayer in particular because of how much they gave back to the multiplayer console genre. And to not hear that talk, like there's definitely been a disconnect for Halo for a long time. When Bungie left and they went to Activision to start developing Destiny rather than being a part of the Microsoft family, and Halo got passed off to 343, that feels like the like break in the Halo like history because it was right after Halo Reach, which a lot of people consider to be one of the last good Halo games, and then Halo 4 came out and so on and so forth. But they have such a huge burden to get this right, and I'm not going to say they got it wrong because I just don't think we were given enough information.
Mm-hmm.
But based off what we were given, I was not satisfied based off what they told us. Because to me, like this is the franchise that defines Xbox. And so there's like a lot of huge stakes here.
And not only that, you hit the nail on the head in saying that a giant portion of this is the multiplayer aspect of it. Giving Master Chief a grappling hook is not enough for me to say, wow, this was a huge success.
And people knew that. They knew it off the box art. He had, if you look on his like arm on the box art that they put out a few days ago, the grappling hook was fairly visible. So like people knew that. Like that, I don't know. They could have focused on other things. So I'm not going to say they got it wrong till I actually play the game and get my hands on the game later in the year, right? But like, there's such a huge expectation. This is a brand new console. It's launching with a Halo game. This should be right. This is their thing, and they have to nail this. If Microsoft could do everything poorly except one game, Halo needs to be the one game they get right.
Right, because so many people will buy this system just based off of Halo alone. And honestly, and now we are giving our opinion of the actual presentation, not of Halo Infinite as a game. The information that was presented to us during the presentation,
yes.
What I thought was going to happen. So when this showcase started with Halo Infinite, they could have very well ended it with Halo Infinite because that was really the main event, no matter what you were. We'll get to Fable in a little bit. There were a lot of great surprises, but really Halo Infinite was the main event of this showcase. So the fact that they started with it, okay, cool. They started off with a bang. But it got me thinking, I wonder if we get more information, maybe the multiplayer part of it will be at the end of the showcase. Maybe that's what will be the main event hook of this entire thing. And we didn't get it. So really, from this showcase alone, you are left with wanting a lot more. Not to say we won't get it in the future, but Jacob, it kind of, at least for this showcase itself, to me, it's like I didn't see enough to get completely jazzed, excited about Halo Infinite. I'm at the same level of excitement that I was going into this showcase about Halo Infinite than I was after watching it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like I'm left with more questions than I am answers at this point about it, right? And like that's what I want to know. And to hark back to what you said a little bit earlier about PlayStation, right? There wasn't like a hammer, but that's also I think because PlayStation has been really good at building franchises that are cohesive. So what are two of the things we saw in and recent too? That's the one thing that Xbox didn't get right is they didn't have a franchise for the or for the Xbox One that will carry, right? Like the only one that I think, and it's a little too niche, is Ori and the Will-O-Wisp. Is a really good franchise that they've been able to build and carry. But again, like if you don't like platformers, then that's not your cup of tea. And I don't think enough people like platformers in this day and age of gaming to really make that the thing. That to say, what PlayStation did reveal in the PlayStation 5 reveal was a new Horizon game, which is a franchise that they hit really hard with in the wake of Breath of the Wild, by the way, in terms of like, which is probably one of the best games of all time, at least in the modern era of gaming. In this generation, the Switch, the Xbox Series X, and the PS5, that will be one of the best games of this generation. Clearly, it was so good. But they hit with Horizon. It has this cult fan base. They built that universe really well. They hit with Spider-Man again, right? Another first-party title. They announced another Spider-Man coming out on launch with the Miles Morales thing. So like they did like maybe they didn't have like some boom new franchise, right? But they just came out with Last of Us 2, right? Which has been on the calendar for a while. Like PlayStation's been really consistent in building these new franchises. If you think about it, right? Like if you think back to PlayStation 3, like that was like Horizon didn't exist, Spider-Man didn't exist. The Last of Us came out right at the end of the PlayStation 3 cycle, and then they remastered it and put it out on PlayStation 4 in better graphics. But to me, like that's the thing is PlayStation's been better through the PS4 timeline of connecting the PS4 and the PS5. Xbox was terrible at connecting the Xbox 360 and the Xbox Series, or the Xbox One, sorry. So they need to be better at like sort of defining genres. Halo is a big moment for that. We're going to talk about Fable in a little bit. Fable is another one that they've got to hit.
Well, to be fair, Microsoft and Sony have both said that they're going to do extensive. They're going to give fans that buy earlier versions the compatibility to be able to come to the new console as seamlessly as possible. So at least those conversations are underway. And if you buy something on the PS4 and upgrade to the PS5, likewise with Xbox One and Xbox Series X for titles that will translate, sports titles being a perfect example, you will get some sort of upgrade mechanism that will be very, very seamless for users. So at least both companies are thinking of that.
I just more so meant like connecting the consoles for like sequels and everything else. They were really, really bad. Like the Xbox One did not have a sequel to a game for the Xbox 360 that was just jaw dropping. The PS4 had Last of Us 2, which is very good, with Last of Us 1, which is a PS3 game, right? And they are setting themselves up to do a very good job of Horizon and Spider-Man, two good PS4 games with sequels on the PS5 that are going to be very good.
So what about the exclusives that we saw? If you were to compare the lineup that we saw in the PS5 reveal versus the lineup that we saw in the Microsoft or the Xbox Series X reveal, the Xbox Series X, other than a couple of trailers like the cute one for Grounded, I thought that was a very fun, self-aware kind of trailer, which I appreciated very much. The one for, what was it? I think it was the Outer World trailer, which was like a lot of fun as well. But the rest of the presentation seemed, I don't know if darker is the right word, but a lot more brooding than the PS5 reveal, which seemed a little bit more upbeat and lighter, at least in some of the titles that were presented. But what do you make of the lineups? Like, if you were to pick a slate of offerings from either one, which one is more appealing to you right now?
Definitely the PlayStation 5. I won't say the Xbox didn't have some good stuff. I'm really excited about Everwild was announced here. They announced more stuff about Ori, also another franchise that, again, like I mentioned, I'm into. I'm a big fan of that franchise. Worth your money. Game Pass is worth your money alone just for getting the two Ori games on PC or Xbox. Fable's like this huge question mark. I think that it is one that will be genre defining or will be console defining for the Xbox Series X. And also, the Game Pass thing that they announced is really big. I think a lot of people are kind of roasting them for that. Like I saw some comments of like, this is huge for Microsoft putting out all the games on Game Pass for a small subscription monthly, and people were like, well, that's because PlayStation puts out games that people actually want to buy at full price. Sort of eroding and deriding the Xbox games.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Things like Everwild are interesting. It's the same development group as Sea of Thieves, which is actually one of the more recent Microsoft published games that is very good, in my opinion. And so yeah, I don't know. I would take PS5 over Xbox right now. But that's all subject to change. But it definitely feels like PS5 has a lead.
Game Pass does have the potential, though, to be a defining feature for players to say, you know what, this is a great deal. And once games that rival the PS5, or at least in perception, get onto Game Pass, I think that there's a really big opportunity there for people to make this. If they're PS5 loyalists and they see what the Game Pass has to offer, especially at the price point, they might say this is something that's worthwhile.
I think you have to do it that way though, because like there was a recent interview a couple days ago, I believe, with an Xbox executive who basically said we can price the Xbox however we want. With Phil Spencer, the Xbox executive, said this: we can price it however we want, and consumers can tell us we're wrong or not. Which, like, we don't know the prices for either console, but that makes me think they're very expensive. The tech in them, right? Like the teraflops and all the crazy stuff you've heard, like that stuff's not necessarily cheap to put together either, right? So like, yeah, they're gonna make a pretty sizable profit as they have on every console, both companies, Sony and Microsoft. But to me, like these are like going to be high-end consoles with a high-end price. The big thing about Game Pass is really interesting. This is the discussion I want to know more about as we learn more about what this pricing is, right? So a low-end gaming PC is probably starts around $800 or $900. If you are looking at an Xbox that is either going to be $500 or $600, is that marginal difference of $300 to $400? Is that worth buying the PC? Because Xbox Game Pass, I have it. I don't even own an Xbox One. I have Xbox Game Pass because I play on PC. I play Sea of Thieves. I played Kingdom Come Deliverance that way. Outer Worlds is actually on there, but I played it before it came to Game Pass. It had like a 1 or 2 week exclusivity period there. Ori is on there. It's actually a really good value if you are a Windows PC user. And obviously Microsoft is a little bit more incentivized because they have Windows, right? Like that is their platform. Sony doesn't develop an operating system for a computer. Microsoft does. So you're still buying something of theirs. Either way, they get a commission for you buying a PC, or at least a kickback for buying a PC. So, if you're going to buy a low-end gaming PC, it almost feels like that's more value if all the games, and that's the big if. They said they will be on Game Pass. They didn't say they'd be on Game Pass for PC because that's different. But if Halo and Fable and all these other games, Everwild, etc., all come to PC in addition to the Xbox Series X, it may not even be worth buying a Xbox Series X at this point if you were able to spend the extra couple $100 or $300 or $400 to buy the low-end gaming PC. You'll get more bang for your buck. You'll have better game library you can tap into with Epic and Steam, etc. Yes, but I feel like if you're about to splurge on a $500 to $600 console, presumably, like it's going to be hard to also ask your parents if you're a teenager and you're wanting one of these. Yeah, spend $500 to $600 on this console, and then also buy me like 4 $60 games, right? Like That's astronomical. That's very like it prices out the average American parent by a significant margin, and especially given the hard financial times we're in right now as a country. So to me, like putting it on Game Pass is good value because it's a lot easier to sell a $10 subscription or $15 subscription than it is to ask to buy that all at once this holiday season.
And really, if the Game Pass does in fact include all of these marquee games, including Halo Infinite, including Fable, etc., then you can really avoid, like you said, buying the console altogether if you already have a gaming PC, and then you can still
Correct.
enjoy all the other PC games. So that's going to be an interesting point there. So let's get to the other big game that was announced near the end of the presentation, Fable. This series is very polarizing. A lot of people absolutely love it. Some people say that some of the titles have missed the mark. What are we expecting, and what did you notice from this particular reveal?
I mean, the reveal was like a fairy and a frog, right? Like we got very limited information here about what this is actually going to be.
We got the feels, though. We got the feels. We got that Fable
the feels.
feeling, right? So, like, when you look at that, you're like, this has to hit, though. Like,
Yeah.
it's different from the Halo Infinite reveal because we knew that coming in. This was almost a surprise to many people to see that and to hear that and say, okay, now I'm starting to get my hopes up here because I have so many great memories from playing this game in this series.
Yeah, it got leaked a few days ago, and I said, like, if you get this right, I'll buy an Xbox Series X. Because it was my tweet. Because like, I have some really great memories with Fable 2 in particular. Fable 1 was great. Fable 1 was good, but they added a lot of features in Fable 2 that sort of upped the ante, right? In terms of like, you could start a family, you could become king, you can run the castle, right? Because you go from like basically being a peasant to going all the way up. And it's Fable 2 was such a fantastic and deep game, so much to do. And Fable 3, you're like basically the descendant of the king or whatever you were. You can actually port data from Fable 2 to Fable 3, based off what your gameplay was. And Fable 3 just didn't like, it was close, but it was also still pretty far away. If that makes any sense. Like they tried. The Connect Fable the Journey was awful. Awful. The Connect itself was pretty awful. Let's be real. I had one and it felt like a waste of money. But it's been, I think, 10 years since Fable 3 came out, if I'm right. Close to it. Almost a decade since Fable 3 came out. And I think people are longing for an RPG like that. It's such a, like, it was such a defining game for the Xbox and the Xbox 360. They've since republished Fable on PC, if I remember correctly, and updated its graphics also. But to me, like, this is the one you got to nail. You got to get this right, and you got to get Halo right, because Fable, there's so much attachment to it, especially people that played Fable 1 and Fable 2. And again, like, I feel like Fable 3 just missed it a little bit, and just there's so much here. But similarly to Halo, is that Fable changed hands at one point. So Peter Molyneux, the head of Lionhead Studios, left. And just like Bungie left Microsoft to go work on Destiny at Activision, there's been such a huge exodus of good developers out of the Microsoft sort of ecosystem, and I've been very unimpressed by the people who have replaced them in terms of 343 working on the Halo thing. No, we've seen nothing of Fable more or less since then. So I really hope that I'm sure they're taking it seriously, but I hope they're going to pay some homage to their original developers that developed these titles, because that's what people like about the Xbox games, is the fact that, you know, these older ones are really still kind of timeless. Fable 2 feels really timeless in a lot of ways.
So those are our thoughts of the Xbox Games Showcase. Of course, they didn't feature all of the Microsoft studios. They did mention at the end of the showcase that there will be more to share later this year as we get towards the holiday season and the next generation of consoles with the Xbox Series X and PS5. A lot of people are saying that the PS5, after this particular showcase, still in the lead, particularly given how much buzz was around the PS5 showcase and the numbers that we saw in terms of viewership and even the releases and the slate of exclusive games. Let us know in the comments below which company, which console you think is in the lead as we stand today, moving towards that release date.